Good evening, everyone, LBE family, supporters, friends, um, agitators, allies. Uh, Welcome. I'm always excited when we get to bring these stories, hidden stories about our history. Uh, Sister Khara. And first of all, how are you?
I'm well, and I am right there with you. I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, anytime I hear names like Viora, because that's a name that we don't hear anymore, Velma, Lily, and Clara, and Minnie, and Louise, those are strong names. Names like that coming from the East Coast, when I hear names like that, I always imagine just strong women. So I'm really excited about this evening. I don't want to prolong it because I'm ready to jump into it, and so I'll see you on the other side.
All right. Well, thank you. And thank you to our audience for joining us this evening. Tonight, we are going to be giving a presentation and watching a video on the Matriarchs of Washington Park. This is the stories of the African American women who persevered through racism in segregated Mesa, Arizona. Joining us tonight are Todd Bailey and the curator and documentarian behind various exhibits on the Matriarchs of Washington Park, Bruce Nelson. Todd Bailey is the Special Projects Coordinator for the Arizona Historical Society. He is an Arizona native who has traveled the world as a professional dancer and dance educator. He began developing a passion for Arizona history and as a child. His grandparents told stories of their family and other African American families migrating west from the southern states. Todd has been with the Arizona Historical Society since 2018, and in that time has worn many hats. He has been a liaison for a certified historical institution program and has helped with connecting curation to Black historians and local communities that have been a challenge to track. Todd's relationship with Marked by COVID, a nationwide awareness and support group, led to a very important and timely COVID Memorial Proclamation event. As part of the guest experience team, he has the unique experience of listening as grieving Arizonans spoke of their family loss amidst the pandemic. Also joining us tonight is Bruce Nelson, who is an independent curator, documentary filmmaker, and published author from Mesa, Arizona. His work as a curator and documentarian focuses heavily on his experience of living in the once segregated Washington-Escobedo neighborhood. His method of curation uses community input as its foundation to thereby reflect and celebrate community members of this often overlooked neighborhood. Nelson's film practice has developed to be in conversation with compatible exhibitions without either relying on one another for context. So, before we launch into our conversation tonight, we're going to watch a brief video focusing on the matriarchs of Washington Park and celebrating these women who demonstrated courageous efforts of community activism, artistry, and kinship in the face of racism and misogyny. These matriarchs of Washington Park will be honored through collection of portraits. So let's take a look at this video.
Who am I? God made me. Who am I? God saved me. He has given me the power to do what He wants of me. I am a woman of God's own heart. I am a woman of God's own heart. I am a woman, hear me pray. I am sanctified to say, I am a woman, ain't no doubt. I know my God will bring me out. I am a woman of God's own heart. I am a woman of God's own heart. Who am I? I am forgiven. Who am I? I am restored. God has given me His love to do all things in Him. I am a woman of God's own heart. I am a woman of God's own heart. I am a woman, hear me pray. I am sanctified to say, I am a woman, ain't no doubt. I know my God will bring me out. I am a woman of God's own heart. I am a woman of God's own heart. I am a woman of God's own heart.
And with that, it is my honor to introduce you to Mr. Todd Bailey and Mr. Bruce Nelson, and welcome you both to Conversation with our LBE community.
Hi, happy to be here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm always excited to share parts of my community with folks that don't know about us. Thank you. So we're gathered today. Hope there's a nice crowd. Hope we have a full house. I watched some of your previous episodes. They look quite good. So we're going to just sort of jump right in, I guess. How did this project come about? You're probably thinking. So what happened was I have been doing exhibits about the community for years, and I just completed the veterans of Washington-Escobedo community. And I found two guys that were actually fought the way out of slavery, became Buffalo Soldiers, and they actually lived in our neighborhood at one point. And I found several that were World War I veterans and just a great big handful of World War II veterans. And so I thought, we just don't hear about them. So I put together an exhibit that opened the first time at the Mesa Public Library. And so I had to do a cutoff somewhere. So I thought I'm going to stop at World War II. I didn't go into Vietnam or the Korean War because that was my era. And so I gathered all these stories. It took about 1.5 years to find the photos and to find the bios of these guys. And we finally got them and we put it on display. And then we started working on a documentary as well. And as the exhibit was closing, I put it in the Mesa Historical Museum. As it was closing, I thought, I didn't find any women that were veterans. There probably were, but I couldn't find them. And I thought, the women were highly significant in our community. So I thought I've got to do something for the women. I've got to figure something out. And I thought, well, let's just take a look. And everybody that's in the exhibit, I know, and Todd knows, we know them well. If we don't know them, they knew us.
Very
And
much so.
so I took a look at that and I said, well, I'm going to take a look at women that were born in the 1920s and earlier, because that was highly significant. I thought about that. Some of these women were born like 1885, 1862. So they would have known firsthand from their mom about slavery, about Reconstruction. They would have known about, you know, the Spanish-American War. They would have known about World War I. They would have known about Jim Crow. They would have known about World War II. They would have known about the beginnings of the Civil Rights Movement as well. And that's something that's unprecedented and probably will never happen again. So that was my cutoff kind of thing. And so I started looking around, and I started in our neighborhood going street by street. I started on Center Street, which is like the button of our street, and I'm working my way across. And I knew Todd for years, because I used to dance as well and I used to teach. And so I knew Todd was a visual artist as well. And so I called him and said, Todd, I got this idea, and I know you paint, so let's get you painting. So I brought Todd in. Todd, why don't you say a few words?
So honored to be here. Hello, audience. Yes, Bruce asked me to paint, which I never seem to find the time to do. You know, working here for the state agency. He asked me. You know, I got jumped at the idea. I remember jumping at the idea because but I was a little bit intimidated, you know, because these women are amazing. It's my grandmother, it's everyone that was on the block, you know, they all lived. I mean, we're talking 5 to 6 blocks of Black community there. And my grandmother, her name was Doll. They called her Doll. Her name was Elizabeth Jones, Lizzie Jones, but everybody called her Doll, Miss Doll, Aunt Doll, just Doll, because she was tiny and cute and pretty. And then my grandfather was this great big cowboy that they called Boss Man. And, you know, to get the opportunity to paint them, first of all, to paint her, as well as these other, you know, women I revered, was such an honor, because, you know, they were hardworking women. And for me, I thought, what a great opportunity to paint them in a different sphere, I wanted to paint them kind of glamorous. I wanted to glam them up. I wanted their heads to be raised. A lot of these women were domestics. So their heads were down, they were working, they were cleaning and cooking and raising children, raising other people's children. So for my paintings, I wanted to paint them in orange groves. I wanted to paint them with the beautiful Arizona skyline, you know, behind them, the sunset. It was important to me. So I'm was super happy to be part of this exhibit. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, it was great. So when I picked the artist, Todd was one of the first one I thought of. My other choice was Carla Keaton, who I've known for a long time. And all the paintings are based on a photograph. And as Todd mentioned, he loved color, but the pictures were pretty much in black and white. There were very few that had color in them. And so the idea was to try to capture the women when they were much younger. And so I scoured through photographs and things, and we had lots of conversations about the things that they liked and where they went, and you know, the kind of work we talked about they do. And typical job, like I said in the video, we're working in the cotton fields, domestic work, midwife, nurse, teachers, educators, and then of course they all went to church. You know, they walked in the spirit. That's the only way they were able to deal with the situation. So we took a look at that premise and said, okay, let's create something. And so each artist, along with Bree Bartz, was another artist I found, I had long conversations with him. We looked at the photographs, discussed them. What do we think should work? And like Todd said, he wanted to glam, he wanted color, he wanted bright colors, he wanted them looking that direction. I said, as long as we walk in and we know who they are, I'm okay with that. So he set the task for himself, and he knocked it out. And so we got an opportunity to see 3 different styles of the artists creating this work. And we have about 19 paintings right now, and I'm going to set them on the task of doing some more shortly. One of the challenges is getting folks to give up a photograph and write a bio. Now, once they saw it, they were like, oh, I see what you're trying to do. But it's like pulling, nails to get them involved. And I got to tell you about an incident that happened that was so wonderful. The exhibit first opened in the neighborhood at what we call the historic Dr. Lucius Austin House. He was the first African-American medical doctor allowed to practice in Mesa. So the first time we unveiled it was at that spot. And Miss Hinton, who's one of the few matriarchs who's still alive, she's like 90, I want to say 93. And so she came and we had her painting covered, and I told Miss Hinton, because I knew her and her son and I went to school. So Miss Hinton, before we unveil this, just know that your children chose this photograph. So if you don't like this photograph, don't be upset with me. And so we unveiled it, and she had on the orange outfit, the orange hat. And the first thing she says, oh, baby, I love that hat. I'm wearing that hat tomorrow. So I thought, okay, we've been successful, because the next day was Mother's Day. So that was the kind of rapport that we had with the women and their daughters or their granddaughters kind of thing. And so I was really excited to do that. The next time we unveiled it was at the Mesa Public Library. And I love doing things at the library because, first of all, they're free and they have longer hours they're open. And people who typically probably would not go to see an exhibit would have an opportunity to see it at the library. And when we're installing it, it was on a Saturday morning. I was finishing everything up, and there was a big kids program going on that day. And there were kids running around everywhere, little kids, 8, 9, 10-year-old kids. And just a wonderful little incident happened. There was this little white girl, she was running through the library. And as she came around the corner there, she saw all the paintings. And it just stopped her. And the first thing she said, she looked up and down at all the paintings. And the first thing she said was, look, Mom, art. And that just shows you the power of art. She didn't say, look, Black women. She didn't say, look, what is this? She saw art. And her mother was so wonderful. She took her and she said, well, this is how we look at art. We step back. We step back and we try to take it in. And so the little girl stood there, just about 9 years old, and just looking at the paintings, just really enjoying them. And I thought that mother probably would not have taken her to if it was at the museum, but it's here at the library and it's free. So I was so pleased. And then as I was leaving, there was another little white girl. She was trying to read the bios, and it wasn't quite making sense to her. And she was looking at it, and she called her mother over, and her mother walked over, and the mother was trying to be kind because there were some typos. And she was trying not to hurt my feelings. And I was thinking, she's reading it. I can fix the typos. This little girl wants to know about this painting. She wants to know about this woman. She's trying to fit. Mother said, well, they should have done this. And I left that conversation alone. I didn't want to get into it. I just thought that was a wonderful moment between mom and daughter for matriarchs. And she was trying to explain to her what matriarchs are. So it has a very visceral effect on folks when they see the exhibit. And I want you tonight, as we go through our discussion, think about the matriarchs in your family and your community. Let Todd
and just the visual, I was there at the Austin House for Miss Hinton's unveiling, and one of the beautiful things that happened that day too, as well, was her saying, oh, Arizona it really worked out for us here. It really, and so that in my paintings, that's what I wanted to portray as well. My family came here from Mississippi. We're from Money, Mississippi. which is the town Emmett Till was murdered in and everything. So, and there were some hostile things that drove my family here. And, you know, as much as people say about Arizona, we have our problems here. It was interesting to see these, you know, elder Black women take a sigh and go, you know, it really worked out over time here. They made it work. And that was a beautiful day. That was a beautiful day and unveiling. I don't think people really understand, like, you know, having a white woman and her daughter stand before these portrait, you know, paintings of Black women who had to use the back door and weren't allowed to go in shops in downtown Mesa and stuff like that. You know, wow, what a, you know, a full circle of a moment. So
Yeah, it was great. It really just stuck with me. So the goal is to have a tour throughout the state. That's the goal for it, right? So then after we did it at the library, the next installation was at the Sidney Poitier Film School, Mix Center, they called it. And we did that in March. I wanted to unveil it in March because it was International Women's Month. And I thought that was a perfect time to do it. So we installed it there. And we had it on the second floor. And then we had the video that you watched earlier that was playing, and people came from all over and looked at it and watched it. And, you know, we hear so often people say, I didn't know there were Black people in Arizona. And yeah, we have a lot of them. And Mesa was one of the bigger communities back in the day, you know, right after Okima over in Phoenix. But so we had it at the Mix Center, and it did really, really well. And a wonderful moment happened again. There's some high school students that have classes there, and they were walking around the facility, and this one young man had no idea the paintings were there. And he was, I talked to some folks who were listening in. They said, as he walked by it, he looked up and he said, that's my grandmother. That Washington, I'm from that neighborhood. And he was like, who did this? He was just like, and he told all of his friends, that's my grandmother, and that's her story. And he was just went out of there just beaming. They were telling me, went over to the Mesa Library and wanted to do some more research and find out some more things. So every time I show it, every time it gets out into the public, we have a great response for it. And I'm glad you were able to see the little short mini documentary that we made. I am doing a fuller documentary about the exhibit. We're still crafting those stories and talking to all of the different ladies, kind of thing. And so I think Todd has a wonderful story about his grandmother reaching out to him when he was dancing and coming into his own life that he wanted to live, which was not, people were not as receptive as they should have been. But his grandmother set him straight and told him, this is how this is going to work. Go ahead, John.
yeah, you mean the letter that you sent me? So when I was young, I'm a proud gay man. And when I was young and finding myself, it was a little, you know what we go through. You don't know who's going to be accepting, who's not. And, you know, believe it or not, the Black community tends to be conservative. There were mixed emotions about who I was and what I was doing and what I was representing and, you know, in life. But, you know, I kind of came out and I moved away. I moved to San Francisco with my partner, and he'd never met any of my family, but my grandmother, who was I was the apple of her eye. She was my best friend, my biggest fan. And she would always send those cards, the like embossed cards with the bunny rabbit for Easter, whatever holiday it was. You know, you'd get them for, I think, $1 or something back at Thrifties and that, you know. But as I started to get old, it started to get a little corny, you know, Grandma, I'm 15, I'm 16, I'm 17. But I love those cards in reality. And here I've moved away. I don't know what's going on at home. I know that I kind of dropped the bomb and left. And it was about Easter time the year after I'd moved away, Grandma had sent me a letter. It it looked like the card that I usually get, but it was addressed to Todd and Tom, and I didn't even know she knew his name. But okay, what's this gonna be? And I just stared at it for a while until I opened it. Finally, I opened it, and sure enough, there's the bunny rabbit. And my grandmother, who I wasn't sure would understand, has, it's got a generic message to my son on Easter. And she has scratched out my son and written to both my sons on Easter. And you open it up, and it was, "I love you both. Happy Easter." And from that day forward, I have never had to apologize for who I am. It was empowering, and I love her for that. I'll always remember that.
It's a great moment. And so the matriarchs they're conservative, yet they surprise us. They walk with God and live with God, but they surprise us. The older ones, they may trip a little bit over something, but they love you, and they figure a way it out. And so some of the matriarchs in our neighborhood, I think about what they've done and what they stood for, and how they persevered through all the challenges that they were faced against. They just really dug in and just said, "We're going to push back." I think about Minnie Briscoe back in the 80s, when the community was under siege and they were trying to gentrify the neighborhood. They were coming in and buying homes and putting people out. And Miss Briscoe lived on Center Street, and she was being interviewed along with Miss Louise Harrington by a newspaper reporter. And they said to her, "Well, what do you think about this?" She says, "I'm not going anywhere." She said, "I've been here a long, long time. I'm going to die in this house. You're not kicking me out. I don't care what they do. We're going to fight." And so she did. She organized. She went around and took folks to the church and said, "This is what you need to do." Her along with Miss King, Miss Harrington, you need to go down to City Hall. You need to be at those meetings, and you need to push back. And they did. They pushed back. And she was about 100 years old when this happened. And she was just feisty as can be. And so they saved the neighborhood. They pushed back, talking to the mayor, the councilman. "You can't just come in and just get rid of us. First of all, you didn't allow us to live anyplace else. Now you want to come in and take this over. It's not going to happen." She really pushed back and got that. She was about 100 years old. And about a year later, they recognized her and they gave her the key to the city. And we have it. I have that plaque with it on there. But those are some of the stories and kind of things that these matriarchs were doing. They figured a way out how to navigate through that landscape of racism and misogyny in a way, and give young people, the next generation, the tools that they need to participate, belong, and make a difference. And I'm so proud to have this exhibit happening.
It was such a, there was such a nuanced community. People don't realize, when people talk about Black people, it's always about how strong we are and everything. We're vulnerable. We're everything everybody else is. And one of my other favorite stories about my grandmother. So you got my grandfather, this big cowboy boss man who runs the gambling shack around the corner. Literally a few blocks away, but I wasn't allowed to even look down that street when Grandma was walking me to church, and we're talking a gambling shack, we're talking dominoes and poker. But the beautiful thing is that, these gentlemen that would hang out there, they would also help people that were down on their luck. They would take in people that had just moved from the South. There's a cot in there, and all of this. But one of my favorite stories is that, there was gambling there. And my grandfather, I think there was a day where he took all this guy's money, this man had just gotten a job, just gotten a new job, had a family, but he was down there, he was gambling, he was excited, and he came down and gambled. and my grandfather took all his money. But, you know, there was a network of women that knew what was going on at all times, these matriarchs that we're talking about. So while that's going on, the phone's ringing, and it's made its way over to my grandmother, and she's like, oh, don't worry, I'll take care of this, you know. Waits till my grandfather gets home, makes him a nice meal, puts it in front of him, and then says, you're not going to eat a bite of it until you take that family back their money. March back through the neighborhood and you give them back. And that's exactly what he did. You know, you had community, you know, community. It's funny. I just was speaking to a gentleman who lived, you know, he's one of the 5th generation LDS families that lives in there. I think he graduated from Westwood High as well. And we were discussing names that we both knew. And he was saying like, yeah, I was one of the few white folks that could go in that neighborhood. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Could go in that neighborhood? Like, what were you afraid of? You know, being hugged and kissed to death? Like, those people were beautiful and, you know, just misconceived, obviously, of what a Black neighborhood really was about. It was really about love and community. When I grew up, you know, there, I also, my family, we moved over. I went to a different high school. It was a later time. I lived around white kids and stuff like that. And then I'd come back to the Washington-Escobedo on the weekends for church and to visit my grandparents. And to me, it was like a magical little place. It was a magical little neighborhood. I didn't look at it as, you know, a bad neighborhood or anything like a lot of most people would have back then, because it was a Black neighborhood. But instead it was like I said, it was magical. And I don't think I've ever encountered anything like that since.
It was a positive place to be, very positive place to be. You know, and so what I did with the exhibit at ASU, we weren't able to do it, but the next time we unveil it, I took a look at those types of work that the women were doing. And so I was able to find a cotton sack from around the 50s and a cotton picking outfit I put together. And that's going to be on a mannequin the next time we show it. I was able to find a 1950s Red Cross nurse uniform that will be on display, as well as a typical teacher's outfit that they would be wearing for the time. And then I even found a 1960s domestic worker outfit, and it was pink, and pink was my mom's favorite color. I remember that. And so I found those, and then the other thing is the church lady. So I've got a outfit that they were typically worn. Those women there, those era, they really dress sharp. Everything always matched: purses, gloves, shoes, jewelry, and of course their hats. Everything had to be matched together. And so when we put it on display, we'll have those pieces as well the next time we do it. And I'm talking to Mesa Community College, who has expressed interest in having it starting in January just around King celebration all the way through to February. And so with all of my exhibits, I always tell people, if you want one, you need to plan early. Don't wait till January to say, I want something for Black History Month. You've got to hit me up, because they're becoming very popular at the time. So this exhibit is very precious to me. We're going to be, like I said, we're going to be expanding it. I've got the artist going to start on some more portraits, and they're all 24 by 36 is the canvas size. And the frames are just incredible. I ran around to all the secondhand stores getting frames, because I went down to buy frames. They're very expensive. And some of these frames are just so elaborate. So hopefully you all will get a chance, an opportunity to see it. I know we're talking about bringing it to Flagstaff at one point. We're going to see what we can do about that. So it's really something that you want to just think about your own matriarchs and what they mean to you. And it's so interesting when one of my artists, she did a showing of her work, Bree, And I did an interview with her, and we were talking about matriarchs. And I said, "Well, how do you think you're a matriarch?" And she said, "Well, no, like I'm so young." She goes, "I talk to my younger sister and nieces, and I help them guide them along." And I said, and then she stopped in mid sentence, like, "I guess I am. I'm becoming. Yes, you are. You're the next generation of matriarchs." And so she looked at that, and she really got a touch. And we found the same thing when we premiered it at the Arizona Mix Center. We had Precious, Precise Step Group, and that's the next generation of matriarchs. That step group, Pretty Precise, that's what they're called. They're wonderful, and so we're going to have them again. So this is something that, like I said, I'm very proud of, and it just took a while to get there. We still got a lot long to go, but I'm looking forward to everybody seeing it. I guess we'll take some questions if you have, Khara.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, thank you both for that conversation and the stories that you shared. I put in the comments on our Facebook stream that you guys had me crying backstage during the conversations of your grandmothers, and just the beauty of the matriarchs in the Black community. So I guess I'll start with that question: what does it mean to be a matriarch in the Black community? Why is that such a significant role?
So you're asking me.
Both of you, yes. I'd love to hear
You're
how you.
asking us. Wow, that's um, you know the women in our community are very precious, and they're really the backbone of everything that happens in our community. Whenever things go wrong, they're the ones that pick everybody up, and we just don't highlight them enough. And a matriarch, respects the one that has come before them and recognizes what they did each time, and they talk fondly of those ahead of them with grace and respect and understanding. And so, matriarch has a lot of different hats to wear, and they wear them well. Sometimes they can be fierce, sometimes they can be gentle. A lot of times they will surprise you. They will surprise you at reactions and things that happen in society. And even as they age, I think about my mom, who lived to be 97, and I took care of her for about 10 years. And I remember one day we were at home, and I was so annoyed at something that had happened. This white guy had done something, and my mom was probably like 92, and I was walking with her to her room because I always walk with her. I didn't let her walk by herself. And at 92, with broken leg and still getting around, she looked at me and said, "Baby, sometimes you just need to stop. You're gonna be all right. You just need to, it's not that important. You need to just stop and just move on." This is coming in like I'm furious, and she said, "Baby, I understand, but you just need to stop. You're gonna be all right." And that's all it took. You know what to say, how to say it at the right time, uh, and that set me back on the right path. So matriarch is many, many things.
Yes, and one of them is like my grandmother's sister, Henrietta Thomas, Aunt Sis, who was the most feminine thing in the world, but that we learned one day at church when she, received the Spirit one Sunday, and she got real happy and threw her hands up and she caught her purse, and it flew up and it flew all the way in front of the altar, and a hatchet fell out of that purse. A hatchet somehow tucked in this tailored little purse. So that's a matriarch. She's a warrior in the community, because sometimes things happened back in the day. We know, to all women, but sometimes, they had to protect each other and protect the family.
Yeah, and they knew how to do that. That makes me laugh. I think about my Aunt Ruby. We always just loved going to her house. She lived in Okemah, and she was, I think, one of the first Black female barbers in Okemah. And it was always such a joy to go over there and watch her. She's, got the straight razor and sharpening it up. It looked like something out of one of those gangster movies, She sharpened up the straight razor, and she'd always tell you, if you have a problem with somebody, you need to call Aunt Ruby, and we can work it out. We can work it out. And we just thought that was so fierce. It's like you didn't see women doing stuff like that. And then she would tuck it back away, and but we got some answers. So yeah, they had their way of protecting each other when needed, no question about it.
I love that in parallel to Mr. Nelson, what you shared about just the juxtaposition of the display of the hats and the dresses and the pride in what they wore, and now your ability to juxtapose that with the historic cotton sack and just creating that fuller picture. So what do you think is the importance of capturing that full picture? Why is that so important for the community to see that and recognize that broader picture?
It makes you realize that there are more rounded people. Because when you look at your grandmother and your mother, when you're younger, you only see them in like a one dimension. And then as you get older and you have conversations with them, or you have conversations with their sisters or their cousins or other people, they start telling you things about them, and you go, "Oh my goodness, I had no idea. I had no idea my granny carried a 22. What? Yeah, she knew how to take care of business. What? She worked in the cotton fields. I didn't know she did that. She's a midwife. No, she worked in the cotton fields, and well, she became a midwife. Well, she's a midwife now. Well, she used to work in the hospital. She never got the formal training, but she know how to deliver babies. That's why when you get hurt, you're not running to the doctor all the time. She knows how to fix you." They were very rounded people, and as we begin to age, we become to get an understanding of that. And they needed to be, because remember, growing up during that era, you had the Black community. We had our doctor in that neighborhood, and you couldn't go downtown and sit in the restaurants, eat in the restaurants. You could buy clothes, but you couldn't try them on. So whatever you bought, you had to keep. And so they figured out ways around that and make it work. And they would talk to each other when they were doing domestic work. If they were having a problem with one of the doctors or attorney or businessman trying to get too fresh with them, they would rotate each other. They would say, "You know what, I'm going to go cover for you for the next couple of days, and don't worry about it. We'll call them and say, you know what, Miss Such and Such is not here, but I'm going to be here today," until that gentleman cooled off. And they just worked that out among themselves, because think about it now, who are they going to report it to? What are we going to say? You lose your job. So they were extremely clever in a way that they figured out how to manipulate the situation. And I remember them, they didn't go for that whole thing that people put against us, the house slave and the field slave. They didn't buy into that nonsense. I remember them because they were in the cotton fields and they were in the house. They saw both worlds, and they're like, that's something somebody has made up. And they would make that very clear. I remember in my house that we all got this struggle, no matter where you're working. So I think it's important to see them in a fuller light, so we have a better understanding of who they are and who they made us become as people.
All right, nuanced people. That's one of the inspiration from my grandmother's painting was the whole idea, memories of watching her work all week in someone else's house, and then throw stuff together so that we could eat on Sunday all together and have 20 people in her tiny house. I remember my cousin one Christmas, my grandmother had been cooking since Friday, and I think Christmas was on Sunday or something. And my cousin asked her, like, "Grandma, aren't you tired?" And she looked at her like she was crazy. She was like, "I can't get tired till I'm through." It was that simple. I can't get tired till I'm through. Don't ask me that. But just amazing, nuanced people. And in my memory, my grandmother went from a domestic during the week, and I'd see her come out of her room on Sunday morning, and that was Diana Ross standing in front of me, you know, with her fine things. They might have been old, but never were they dirty, you know. Never, people would still want those pieces today. That's why, you know, Hallelujah Hats is going to be such a wonderful exhibit. Um, you know, nuanced people.
Yes, I love it. Mr. Bailey, one of the things that you talked about was also how often the story of Black people and Black communities are tied to struggle and the idea of overcoming. And it made me think of, I just had a conversation with my dad yesterday about the book, the 1619 Project, Born on the Water, so the children's version. And one of the lines saying, there was a time when they did not pray for freedom. There was a time when they did not sing about overcoming. So why is it important for us as the Black community to remember our stories and our communities beyond those stories of suffering? Why is that so important for us to hold on to and to remember?
You know, personally, I think is because we are magical beings from that pressure, from the great pressure comes forth a diamond, you know. And, you know, working in history, for example, here in an archival institution, in a state institution, a lot of our history ends up in landfills, you know, because we're either afraid to let go of them, we're afraid somebody else is going to monetize off of it, or we're not, and then it ends up, you know, we pass away and this stuff has been kept in a shoebox or what have you, rather than brought out and presented to the world, because, you know, these are amazing people and amazing stories that, you know, Bruce's veterans exhibit, for example, as much as I know and as much as I've been working in history, it wasn't until I walked into his exhibit that I was able to connect that the older Black ushers and deacons at the church, that I don't know, they were just older Black men, that I'm finding out, I'm seeing photos of decorated, you know, World War II veterans now. I didn't know that about them. I didn't know that I could have been proud of them for that, of that community, and could have been bragging about it and all of that. They came back to Jim Crow. You know, I think that's even more of a reason to honor them and their strength. It's just really important. Like, you know, they don't want us to tell our history, you know, or it's about, you know, we grew up in class seeing videos about Africa, you know, which was often uncomfortable because our history became a National Geographic, something that was we were so far removed from. And then all of this beautiful history that we really have, people that have invented things, that have farmed this country, that have built this whole, you know, women, you know, with mass incarceration, there you are with matriarchs, women that had to take over the family and be the leader of the family because there was no one else. I think it's super important, because if we don't tell our own stories, who's going to tell them? And the mediocrity that's out there wants to hold us back from telling our stories. The mediocrity. I think I answered your question.
Yeah, I like that. It's like, you know, they didn't start where people think they did start. You know, they're quite intelligent, quite bright. They didn't maybe get the formal education that folks would want to get, but they had dreams and they made things happen in the community. they developed skills as they needed, and they learned them. And the servicemen are a great example of that. Very clever in creating a life, and keeping things under wrap. They weren't always showy and everything. They didn't need to do it that way. Those women, that generation of women and men, and like Todd was saying, with the veterans, going over there made some discoveries. So I think you're right. It's important to know that there was struggle, but there was some wonderful achievements made within that. And every road is different for everybody, depending on what's going on where you are. But be an educator and know how to do that, how to teach folks without even going to school for it. They figured that out. And so they had those positive things. And in our neighborhood, Washington, we had the junkies, we had the winos, but we knew them. Everybody knew them. So they weren't going to get out of line. It wasn't like, as bad as people said, we knew him. They would talk to you and everybody would look after you. And I never went back in there. So I think it's important to know that they are rounded people. They have dreams, they have aspirations, just like anybody else. And they achieved a lot of those things that they wanted. And they were really looking at the next generation. How we're going to make it better for the next generation. If this is what it takes, then I'll make that sacrifice. I think that's beautiful.
And the matriarchs kept coming too. That's the thing. I look at my own mother, who's buried everybody older than her now. And, we're back in the neighborhood, and this is a great time to be back in the house that she grew up in and working on all of these different items. The song that you heard in Bruce's video was a song that she wrote. My mother is known as Joyce the Voice. She's a gospel. She could have been an opera singer if I hadn't come along, I'm sure. But amazing and well known in the community. But there are amazing other people. There's everything from like a former Playboy bunny here to my cousin Donna, who was, I think, the first female detective in Mesa, and literally was like, get Christy love, or she's gorgeous and tall and respected and did her job and was, breaking stereotypes and ceilings. And the matriarchs just kept coming. There's plenty.
Yeah. Plenty of coming. And you're right, the song, we had such a pleasure creating that song, Joyce. I was interviewing her when we unveiled the first screening of it at the Austin House. And as during the interview, she says, well, I've written a song that I'd like to, donate to the project. And I said, well, let me hear it. And, of course, she started singing a few lines. And I go, you know what? I'm going to figure it out. We're going to record it. Whenever I'm doing projects, it's just like, how do you raise the funds? You go and you do crowdfunding, you try to get grants. And I told us, I'm going to record the song. I said, I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to find a studio and, we're going to go top notch. And it took me a while to find the right spot and, raise the funds. But we went into the studio, Todd was there, and we went in and she sang the song for the guy. The guy was a great producer. I really appreciate what he did. And then, I know she was a real pro. So I knew I could ask her to embellish stuff. I said, well, here's what I need you to go back and sing a harmony to this part. And so she looks down and looks back up and says, okay, I'm ready. And just put the harmony line in there. Less than 10 minutes, we had harmony, from her. I said, I want you to do it. And so our producer, I said, well, I need some other instrumentation besides the piano, and I need some tambourine here. And the guy was great. He tried. I go, no, I don't like that. Try this. Yeah, that's the rhythm I want. And Joyce, I would look over at Joyce to make sure that I've got, okay, I'm on the right track. So I'm not going to get too far off. And I got a guitar lick going in there. And the guy was getting a little faint. I looked over there. She just like, no, that's not what it is. No, you need to pull that back. That's not what this is. And then we had some drums going in there, and I said, you need to do it, and he would get it. And I played some other gospel songs, helping with. But every time, I would just glance over at Joyce, and she'd let me know that ain't. I don't know what y'all doing, but that's not it. That's not going to work. And then we got it. We went in the studio. We knocked it out in about, we were there maybe an hour, Todd, maybe. We were there an hour. And then he had to go in and mix it and make some adjustments and stuff. And then I guess a couple weeks, I sent them and said, hey, we got a song. We got a song. So I'm really proud that she was able to do that. And it just, I was just thrilled with the song.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for making that even happen. And once again, that's inspired from my grandmother cleaning the house of a piano teacher back in the 50s. And that humble salary bought a piano. And my grandmother was like, my mom had 3 other sisters, 4 girls. And she was like, you're all going to learn to play. Whether you liked it or not, you all are going to learn to play this piano. And they did. And, you know, my mother ended up playing for the church at like 15, I think. My aunt, Khara, who played prior, had moved away. And they told her, oh, you're next. She was a little horrified, I think. But, I mean, my mother's voice and her energy are history in itself here. So,
you know, a couple different times in the conversation, you both talked in different ways about some of the intimidation and the challenges that were faced in either creating art or even in just getting folks to share the photos and the stories and all of that. And what's really interesting to me in that is just how important and how hidden and treasured our histories are, and yet how hesitant so many are to share those stories. What do you think creates that sense of holding on or holding back on sharing those things publicly? I think earlier, maybe Mr. Nelson, you referenced the fear of it being essentially taken and monetized for other folks or things like that. But it seems like that treasuring of it is really important within the community, and it creates that challenge. And how do I get this story out for other people to see without being disrespectful or without risking some of that treasuring that exists?
Yeah, that was, you know, and everybody knew me, so that helped a lot. But historically, you know, we have been just dogged with our history. People come in and they take it and they put it in a direction or in a frame it in a way that is not very positive. And so I can understand the apprehension. And so that's why for the bios, I said to the families, I want you to write the bios. I know about them, but you know more. And so write what you're comfortable with. You don't have to say everything. You don't have to talk about everything. Just write what you're comfortable with. And that will be what it is. Whatever you want to share, I'm okay with that. And so just reassuring them that, you know, my mother, my grandmother, they're in this thing too. You know, my neighbors, you know, and I have to do them all justice because they are watching. You know, they're like, there's my mom back there in the little heart. She's watching. She's always keep an eye on me. Say, look, you need to stay true to who we are as women. And so the apprehensiveness is definitely noted, and people are a little concerned. But they've been seeing some of my exhibits, and as they see more of them, they begin to have more confidence in me, and that I'm going to represent them in a way that is the best possible way. So, but definitely historically, people have not always handled us with kid gloves like they should.
Yes, and working in an institution that's, you know, when I came to work here, the curator was from Wisconsin or something, and she'd been given the assignment finding the African American migration to Arizona, and she was pulling her hair out because she couldn't. I'm like, oh, you gotta know people, you know. Let me call so and so. Let me call Bruce. let me call relax. It's here. It's just not where you might think you're going to find it. And we pulled this great exhibit together called A Place for All People. And that kind of started, you know, a little bit more energy in collecting. And Bruce has been doing more, and I've been doing more. There's been symposiums happening, you know. Coral was one of my guests at a symposium down here and everything. But one of the things in the past, like, people have made attempts to archive Black history and maybe not finished, you know, gotten frustrated and dropped the ball after you've engaged with this community. So that's part of it too. Like, you're not going to do nothing, you know, you're not going to do nothing with it. You're just going to take it, and I'm going to lose it, you know, and it won't amount to anything, you know. So just having those conversations are kind of awkward. There's a community down south, the Mobile. We've been trying to get them. It's a really powerful story of one family that ended up down there, the last family of a whole, you know, original Black community that were picking cotton down there until it was done, and, you know, everybody one by one moved away. So I had it in my hands, this bag of history from this. I had it in my hands last year for the photos, but someone in the family didn't trust us, and they clammed up and took it back. And so that story it's not even my right to tell that story yet, basically. But it was I think that, didn't she get all 13 of her kids through school or something? They were all college graduates or something like that, something amazing like that. So I'll get it somehow.
You both have shared that you're both painters, you're both dancers. I'd love to talk about, because we've been having this conversation a bit here in Flagstaff, about the importance of artistic expression in Black cultural preservation. And the thing I really want to go back to is the story that Mr. Nelson, I think you shared, of the little girl who was in awe of the art, and the fact that she first identified it as art, not as, look, a Black lady or anything like that. So why is it so important, both that Black art is recognized as art, but also that it's not pigeonholed into that place of, well, yes, it's art, but it's Black art. It's different, or it stands outside of accessibility to any other audience.
You're right. So let me clarify. I'm not a visual artist, so I don't paint. I don't want to put myself in the category with those three. If I did those paintings, they would look like stick figures. So just let me clarify that. So the medium of creating art is that it's not always woe is me. That's not what it always is. And with these portraits, that's not what we captured with these women. We didn't capture, oh, woe is me. I've been in the cotton fields, feel sorry for me. That's not what we captured. You know, art is art. You know, good art, bad art, it's art. It says something to you, whether you agree with it or disagree with it. It always says something to you, and that's what art does. And people take away different things from it, and so you have to be careful that people want to say, okay, like you suggested, oh, this is Black art. Oh, this is art. And that little white girl, that's what she saw. She was just like, wow, I'm in the library running around playing with some character, whatever, and look at all this art in the middle of the floor here. Like, what? Whoa, mom, look, this is like, you know, so she recognized, and that's the power of the work that my three artists created, because they took their time, and whenever I do these projects, I make sure that I get their supplies and get everything they need. I said, I don't want you running around thinking about that. I don't want you. I want you to paint. I want you to have conversations with me, read the bios, and they did not see each other's work until we presented it at ASU. The three of them were there together for the first time. At the Austin house, Todd was the only one that came through. Carla was there, but she didn't get to see any of the paintings. So at ASU, that was the first time they met each other, first time they seen each other's art. And each of them, as they were doing their portraits, they would ask me, what is the other artist doing? I said, don't worry about them. I've chosen you for what you do. And so that's what I'm looking for. And so as you go through the pieces, you go, oh yeah, you can see the distinction between the artists. There's some similarities, but you can see, and people as they start looking for them before they even look at the signature, after they've seen them over, and they get a sense of, okay, that artist, they don't know the name, but that artist did that one and that one, I can see how it works. And so it's important that we realize that just as in any profession or any race, you know, Black artists are diverse and they have their own perspective on what they want to create. And it speaks to people in a different way. Like I say, art speaks to you, speaks to everybody differently. Everyone has a different conversation with it. Sometimes it's a short conversation. Sometimes it's a powerful conversation. Sometimes you look at it and you don't get much of a conversation. And that's a conversation. And so art has a way to level the field when you're putting work out there. So I think that's the way I want to say that.
And we're such talented beings from the pressure of the diamond, even just paintings aside, because of the times I grew up in, I'm growing up with all these, I want to dance, right, as a kid, but everyone around me is white, but I find this dance studio, I really want to dance. And one of my first teachers is Bruce Nelson. One of my first jazz teachers. I've been taking all this ballet, and now I have this Black man to kind of like, and I can't explain it. It clicked something in my head that made it a possibility. A few years earlier, I had this Christopher Boatwright was his name, and he came through and he was principal dancer with Ballet West for Nutcracker, as I was in Nutcracker, and I can't explain it to you. He walked in the room and he winked at me, and it was like, of course, I can do this. I'm not traveling in the sidecar of this experience, and in response, over the years, I've trained fleets of white kids to dance and given them a more specific experience with a teacher, as a Black man, the way I related to those kids. When I went out to perform in New York, they were like, what's going on in Phoenix? Why is everybody so good? I don't know. It's a year-round activity that you can do indoors. I don't know. But to be this African-American ballet-trained ballet dancer from the desert, this anomaly, and then now years later to see all of these kids on So You Think You Can Dance with the limber legs and the flying, I feel like a part of that. I feel like a part of that when you see these young Black men, I was what they wanted to be at one time. And just that connection, and art can't hurt you. Art is a language. Art is how we tell our stories. And, it's important for lots of reasons.
I want to talk about the neighborhood, but also you both spoke about the sense of finding place and space and the opportunity to make it in Arizona, particularly in terms of those who migrated from the South. And we have a lot of conversation about that here in Flagstaff and along Route 66 of of just that migration from the Jim Crow South to a place that still had its challenges, but was very different and provided those opportunities to create a place and a place that you were able to call home and community. So, can you talk a little bit more about what it meant for the creation of the Washington-Escobedo neighborhood? How did that kind of come to be formed? And despite the challenge of that being the place that Black people could live or were forced to live, but it became a neighborhood and a place of community and belonging. So, how did that kind of develop?
Wow. So you have to remember, so 19, well, actually 1899, the first Black family, McPherson family, came to town. The history books tell us that they arrived in around 1905 or 6. But doing my research for my projects, I found a newspaper article that noted that Alexander McPherson was in downtown Mesa, 1899, with his horse and wagon. And so, uh, again, me finding that out, that's not what they've told us. They say 1905. Well, that's 5, 6 years earlier, because he used to work on the dam that we have here in Arizona. He would take supplies down there. So he had a horse and wagon. And that was probably a huge deal to see a Black man in downtown Mesa with a horse and wagon, because to come by that was very challenging. But I remember he was in the Civil War, he was a Buffalo soldier, so he knew about horses. He knew about, they really knew. And so that was the first family that got there. And when they first got to Mesa, people really, they lived in different places, and because they were the only ones. But as we started to get a few more, that's when the community, the city decided, okay, we're going to designate an area for you, and no one's going to rent, or you can't homestead in any other place but that community over there. And one of the next to come to town was a guy who really we don't talk enough about, James Livingston. He was a veterinarian. He was in Prescott first. He lived in Prescott, and then he came to Mesa around 1905, and he lived right down the street from the McPhersons. And so when he first came to town, and so now they were saying, okay, we've gotten 5 or 6 families, we're getting more people. So then they designated, this is where you can live. No one else is going to rent you anything. So as you got more, than 1918, after World War I, you had people coming. And I believe it's because most of the guys that trained for the war were trained at Fort Huachuca. And so they made their way here, probably, heading to California, because then those that you're talking about, the train was really the only way you got around. So as you started getting more influx of Black folks coming, the city folks decided, well, this is where we're going to plant you. And the school was built there. And now I've done some research, and some folks say that the guy who owned the land, he gave it to him because he felt everyone should have an education. Some folks say, well, if we give them this land and give them this school, we're going to contain them in this one area because it's not too far from the cemetery. And Black folks are scared of ghosts. So, you put them there, they're not going to go outside of that. And so you had all of these people coming, 1918, 1920, 22. The school opened in about 1923, 24, Booker T. Washington School. And then a lot of them were living on the outskirts and living on farms over by Chandler, outskirts of Mesa. Mesa now, far east, it was just like nothing. Now it's like all built up. So that's when you had people concentrating there. And it's like a 1 square mile radius. Now, we were never officially a sundown town, but everybody knew you needed to be back over there when the sun came down. Tempe was official sundown town. So was Scottsdale. So was Prescott. So it was contained there. So people started to gather together and realize that they needed to take care of their own. So we had 3 corner stores that had fresh fruits and vegetables. You had a choice to go to one of them. At one point in the 50s, there was a restaurant that had like a little jukebox. You could go to like the 40s that were having that. So we really came there and they were like, well, we got to school, and people got together and they helped each other. It's a wonderful story about a group of servicemen over that were training in Williamsville Air Force Base. They had gotten orders to go and do some work. And the commander gave them their orders, written orders, say, here, you guys, you need to go over here, do this, get on back. And they took off and left. This is like around 1940, 42, around there, 40, 41. And they took off and they were gone for about an hour, hour and a half, and they finally came back. And the commander was like, what is going on? You've been gone an hour, you haven't done any work. Where have you been? And then finally one of them said, well, nobody can read. You gave us a instruction. We didn't know where we were going. So the community heard about it. And so the teachers and the women had weekly classes at the recreation center, which was called the Colored Hospitality House for the servicemen. So every week they would come and learn to read and write. And it's a wonderful article. Some of the guys said, you know what, I'm so glad I'm getting out of this man's army with some kind of skill. Other guys would say, I get to write home. I get to say what I want to say. Not what I may tell them what I want to say, but that may not be what they're writing. So the community really galvanized around itself and supported itself and looked after itself in a way that made it very positive. And, they would trade in the early years, they would trade different skills and teach you kind of fade away. So that's kind of a real rushed idea of what was happening in Washington. It was originally Washington Park. And then Escobedo didn't happen until 1952 when the public housing happened. That's when we took on that. So now today we're a heritage neighborhood. We pushed back and we got that designation to keep from having gentrification happen in the neighborhood. That's a real quick nutshell of kind of what's happening there.
But there's also, growing up in the 70s and 80s, there was a section of it that was, affordable housing or low income. The projects basically was what we were told this area was, one area of it. But it wasn't until recently that I learned that those were originally military barracks because of African American servicemen that weren't allowed to live on base, had to drive all the way back to the Black neighborhood, which was mind-blowing. And the other story, I thought it was curious that like almost in any Southwest, Arizonan Black family kitchen, you can get a taco. You can get greens, you can get all that good stuff, but you can get a taco and some enchiladas, right? And I'm thinking, Mom, Grandma didn't make enchiladas and tacos in Mississippi. Like, how did this come about? And she kind of lost it for a second. She was like, there were Mexican women that came to the church basement and sat with us, and they taught us how to roll. This must have been back in 1950, whatever. So just that cross culture of like Southwest, I love it. I love that story. The neighborhood was beautiful. Like I said, like a magical place for me.
And so you both also then talked about the fight against gentrification. And I believe in the video, it talked about that these matriarchs are really the force behind protecting the community against efforts of gentrification. So the first question is, what do you think led to that attempt at gentrification? What made that community that was specifically relegated to only Black people can live here suddenly desirable to others coming from outside?
You know, there are a couple things that were happening. The first time in the 80s, you had an exodus from the community. You know, a lot of people just didn't want to be there anymore. They were just like, and then you had across America, you had crack cocaine coming in, and it hit our neighborhood as well. And we didn't really have a drug problem. I mean, people did, you know, smoke weed and did, you know, heroin, but they weren't violent. So you had that happening. So the city, you know, allowed that to come in, and then people were looking at Mesa in a different way in the 80s. They were like, oh, this is not a bad place to live. It's always been sort of thought of, okay, because the Mormons, you know, came there first, landed there first, that people didn't want to be there. But once they come in and they kind of see things, they go, it's some nice neighborhoods here. So the city started looking at that. And I guess the mid 80s, late 80s, and early 90s, they were talking about the light rail and all that, early conversations. And you have a lot of winter visitors come to Mesa. So as that started to happen, people started looking at Mesa. And so the city,
Baseball.
baseball, you know, that people wanted to be there. And so when the Hohokams opened up their park, you know, they took it from the Rendezvous pool got closed and they moved it across the street from where we were, their other park. That's when people saw an interest and thought, okay, and the city owns a lot of the property in the neighborhood. That's one of the bigger things. They own a lot of property there. And so they regulated that. But the real big push came, I would say, the 80s, and they pushed back. And then the 2000s, when the light rail came through, people thought, oh, you're really part of the downtown. You know, it's not that far. And so that's when we pulled together. And that's when I did my first documentary, Northtown, because I wanted people to remember that we were here. And so now it's become a desirable place to be. The light rail is just a hop, skip, and a jump. There are buses that run through there. People want to be there. And so we gathered together and we headed a heritage neighborhood, which helps to protect us. And our council member has always been very much on our side. Whenever someone comes and wants to build something, one of the first things Jen Duff says is, have you spoke to the community? Before you talk to me about what you want, talk to them, and she'll give us some names. You talk to these people and then come back to me and then we'll see. And so we were able to get the projects and turn them into, you know, not so much affordable housing, but based on your income. And the developer was really good. He really, really worked with us. And we even talked to him early on saying, how can we create a path to ownership? And they were up for that. And we looked at, I forget how long we settled, 20 years or 30 years, I forget what it was, but they recouped their money. Then there was an opportunity for them to buy those spaces. And they saved 4 of the original buildings. And like Todd was alluding to, it was originally public housing, but when the war broke out, it became the WPA workers lived there, and then the servicemen lived there. And my documentary talks about that. This is what they even did so bold. They even put an ad in the paper, the local paper, saying, colored people, please find housing for the troops. It's like, you're in the military. You didn't say that about the British troops, okay. So people did. They did. They stayed in their homes. They stayed on their farms. So we pushed back in a way, and now we have a little bit of protection. We had a guy come about a year ago who wanted to do something. He called me up. I said, I know you have a presentation. They may not be wanting to hear that, but you're perfectly welcome to try. And he wasn't in his presentation 2 minutes, and they were like, we're not here to hear that. This is what we want from, if you're going to come build here, this is what we want. And he said, yeah, but I've got this beautiful, and they said, we're not looking at that. That's not, he packed up, he went to his guy, they haven't been back. And you know, that's probably what you should do, is not come back. So we're doing better. This is the 60-year anniversary of the East Valley NAACP. And I am working with SRP, hopefully, to do something to commemorate that. And as far as I know, there's one of the founding members still with us, Miss Norma Washington. She was the secretary. And Bruce Cooper's mom, from Channel 12, that's his mom. And so I really want to do something to honor her. And so we're on track to do some wonderful things. I'd love to do. I'm figuring out how you do this historical designation. I'm figuring out. It's about, for us, historical preservation is not so much about the building, With the white community, it's always about the structure of the building, the design of the building. For us, it's what happened in those spaces. What are the stories that took place? I think about when the Japanese had to give up their homes. Excuse me, somewhere they must have had conversations about what are we going to do. If you lived, on a certain side of Main Street, if you lived south of Maine, you had to go to internment camp. If you lived north of Maine, you didn't have to go. They must have had conversations about who's going to look after their family. If they have to, how do you sell your goods? They had, that to me is more valuable than a structure. And so events that happened that took place. So I'm looking at our neighborhood to say, this is what happened. This was the first, like Mr. John Briscoe was the first World War I African-American veteran to join the VFW. So his home needs to reflect that. He was the first one. And I've got a picture of him at the VFW. He's surrounded by white people, him and his wife. So that's a significant, even though the building doesn't qualify, the event qualifies it. And so that's the direction I'm trying to go. Get a little long-winded there, but that's kind of like what I'm seeing.
And we, just to piggyback on his comments, so the neighborhood has become more brown. Let's not, we wish this had happened a lot sooner, that they could have sank money into the community and opportunity while there was still some of the, the elders were still around and everything. Some of us are still there and it's great, but there's stories like the baseball players that used to stay at Dr. Alston's house from the Negro League, and my mom, just sitting with my mom and having her remember, oh yeah, they used to walk through this alley right here to go down to the field. And then at the Heritage Center right now, we have an exhibit about baseball teams that formed from within the Japanese internment camps that he was mentioning. And so there are photos because the Negro Leagues went in there and played against them, apparently. The guy whose collection it was, I'm like, photos or it didn't happen. I need these photos, So we're going to have them for Juneteenth. Some of these beautiful photos, we made it work. And yeah, I forgot what your original question was because it started gushing. My memories.
I don't even remember what the original question was because this is so interesting and so important. I think I think the question was, why did people start pushing to gentrify the community? But I think what you both have really drawn the conversation into was the next question of just why it's so important to protect these places and these spaces. Particularly for Black communities and the preservation of, again, as you said, Mr. Nelson, not the structure, but the stories and the things that happen there. So much of what you're talking about tonight, I'm jotting notes down on the side because just the idea of, cotton fields and internment camps and Negro League teams and all of these things, like in Arizona, really? No idea. I had no idea. And so it's just, these are the stories that we have worked so hard to bring forward because it's so important that people understand that, we have been here and we exist in these places and we have these stories. So I'll wrap us up because we're coming to the end of our time. But I want to thank you both for just all the stories that you shared tonight and all of this wealth of information and art and culture and celebration. I think the final question that I'll ask to close us out is, why to you is it so important to share these stories and to bring that visibility to communities that are forgotten about? What does our audience need to carry away from this conversation about why that's important to keep shining light on those different stories?
So we see people trying to tell our story for us, first of all, trying to make us a monolith. This is what it is to be Black in America, speaking for us, you know, with that gentrification of the neighborhood, for example. Like I told you, our family like fled Mississippi to come and find a safe place in this Washington-Escobedo neighborhood, only to, you know, my mom's friend took care of my grandmother in her dementia years. And where the house is has become this street where they built a wall. And on the other side of it is all of the city, you know, business that they decided to put there, where there were houses, where my grandmother's friends were, the people that she migrated here with. The houses are gone. And the caretaker said, yeah, she used to sit here and say, I want to go home, take me home, to where she'd put her in the car and drive around the block. But one of her things was, I can't stand it, these trucks. I can't stand that. No, and it was city vehicles now that are coming down what once was a peaceful little Black suburban neighborhood. And the idea that they're making it better while taking away this Black woman's peace that she's already suffered, you know, in life. And now here, it's just important to tell these stories because those people were amazing. And I revere, you know, mid-century Black people living in horror, living in housing discrimination, getting your neighborhood taken away. And if we don't tell these stories, who's going to?
Yeah, what Todd's referring to, there's two like mini power plants in our neighborhood that people often forget about. And they're just, one is on University and one is right off of 6th Street there. And what he's talking about, that used to be a dirt road where the canal was. And that's the power plant there. And so I think you have to remember the past so you can move into the future. And if you recognize what happened, you can recognize the signs and say, you know, if you let these certain things continue, this is where we're headed. So you need to tell that history. You say, you know, well, let me take you back and talk about when this happened in, you know, 1912, and no one pushed back. And the next thing that happened was something worse. And so you need to tell those stories. Say, hey, you need to wake up. You need to be aware that what's coming down the road here. And you look at the past to tell that. And then it gives you strength and say, you know what, they dealt with something very similar. And this is what they did. This is the time that they lived in, and this worked. You need to take that and think outside the box in a different way so you can move forward. And so you have to dig into that history, you know, to find out. James Livingston, the veterinarian, used to take care of people because there was no Black doctor. Dr. Austin didn't come until 10, 15 years later. And you go, oh, okay. Okay, I get it now. So yeah, you got to remember the past, and we have to tell it. So we tell all those stories, the good, the bad, the indifferent. And I never pull any punches. I give it all to you when people ask me. I say, I'm gonna tell you everything that I was told. And Mr. Boyd was my go-to guy. Unfortunately, he passed away last summer. He turned 100 years old, and 3 days later he passed away. But he was on the phone on his birthday driving at 100. And he was doing great. And so I would always go to him. I said, Mr. Boyd, you know, what do you remember? And I'd give him a name and he would just run with it. And so I think it's vital that we take a look at that history. And we tell people, if you want to donate something, take a picture of it first, scan it, photograph it, then loan it, and do it as a loan, a long-term loan. But your family can come get it anytime they want. But make sure you keep a copy of it so you have it so people can enjoy it. So it's very important. Look at that. Just recently, I think about, I had gotten a call from William Menhenet's great grandchildren. William Menhenet was the guy who started the film business in Mesa. He opened the Nile Theater, excuse me, back in 1924, and it was the opulent theater in the country. And just recently, his granddaughter, great granddaughter, and grandson came to the Mesa Historical Museum and donated some portraits of them, photos. And she wanted it to live on somehow because her kids weren't as interested in it. She did make copies of it, but she loaned it to them as a long-term loan. And I think that's one way that we can keep our history. And you tell all the generations, these are where these pieces are. They're on loan. Here's the paperwork. It's on loan. Whenever you want it, go and get it. But make sure you document it and make copies so we have it. So I think it's vital that you look at the history. It will help you appreciate the future, and it will help you make better choices as to how we move forward in the future.
Well, thank you both. This has been absolutely amazing and invigorating, reinvigorating. I was exhausted today, but I am wide awake now. This was just an amazing conversation, and I and our community are extremely grateful to both of you for joining us tonight, for again sharing these stories, and particularly, for capturing these stories in your art and in the work that you're doing with the Historical Society. Just all of it is so important, and we are all better for it. So we are extremely grateful to you, and we hope to have that exhibit, any of your exhibits really, here in Flagstaff. We have the historic Murdoch Center here in town, and I know it would be a welcome addition to our community for as however long it could be here. To our community, we say thank you again for joining us. These sessions are, again, just important parts of capturing the history of not just Flagstaff, but other communities in the state and across the country, and telling the stories that are at risk of being forgotten. And hopefully sharing with the rest of the community why it's so important to share these stories and to remember this history. And as Mr. Nelson said, bring it into our present so that we actually have a future to make our way towards. So we hope that all of you will continue to join us in the future. And until then, as we always close these sessions, go in grace.